Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silvermont, and this is my review of the Shadow of the Colossus Remake on PS4. This is not a sponsored review. I bought the game because I've been interested in Shadow of the Colossus for a few years now. It came out during a period where I wasn't playing very many games, so it flew under the radar for me, but I heard good things about it. I played the re-release on PS3 briefly, doing the first boss, but that's all the experience I've had prior to now. So when they announced a remaster, I decided it'd be the perfect chance to finally get the game finished. Originally released at the tail end of 2005 and early 2006 for Europe, Shadow of the Colossus is a spiritual successor of sorts to Eco, a game with a similar visual style and atmosphere, but rather different gameplay experience. The basic premise of Shadow of the Colossus is extremely simple. You play as Wonder, a young man who seeks to revive a sacrificed girl. In order to do this, you must traverse a vast, forbidden land, defeating 16 colossi. And that is it. That is the entire game. You hold up your sword to point you in the direction, then you make your way to the boss, in order, one at a time, and then you figure out how to defeat them. Repeat 16 times. Each of the bosses is a large entity, some are only several times larger than you, whereas others are more than 30 times your size, hundreds of feet in length or height. They are defeated by finding weak points on their bodies. This usually involves climbing on them, and it's more of a puzzle than, say, direct combat. There are no real combat mechanics in Shadow. You can swing your sword once, but it's not very precise. You can dodge roll, but enemy attacks are so huge that you're generally going to take damage if you're near them, even if you roll away. As well as a sword, you have a bow with unlimited arrows, which is used less to shoot things and do damage, and more to just draw attention and aid you in solving the puzzles. The Colossi are the stars of the game, seeing as they are just about the only other things you'll meet throughout your journey, outside of a few small animals. You might be wondering how different 16 giant enemies can be, but considering they are obviously the driving force of the game, they do feel relatively distinct and unique. Now of course, some of them are relatively simple, but 16 feels like a good number. Supposedly the game initially had over 40 before cutting it down to around 20 and then 16, which I think is a good idea. More is not always better when you think about pacing fatigue. This remake doesn't add any new ones or unused cut ones, unless it's very well hidden and nobody's found it yet. So what does the remake do? Well, it is a complete visual overhaul. And if you're curious as to some specifics on just how much the game has changed visually, Digital Foundry have a good video going in depth in the detail there. Running on PS4, it's 1080p and 30fps. On the PS4 Pro, you have the option for 1080p 60fps, which is the way I played, of course. Apparently the original PS2 version had significant frame rate issues, and even the PS3 version wasn't ideal. Being able to play at 60fps is thus a great change. In looking at videos of the original, it was an advanced game for the time with some impressive physics and effects, and the style was driven more by motion and emotion than, say, high-res assets. The bloom and blurry qualities of the original game gave it an almost dreamlike appearance. This remake has much sharper textures, so you can make out every little detail, but more importantly, running at 60fps means you can really appreciate the amazing animations and physics that the game has to offer. Or sometimes the physics do get a bit demented, but hey, it happens. Not to mention, it lets you see the fur or hair of the colossi moving in a very convincing manner. Complete with the game's very minimalistic user interface, it's very easy to understand why this game was such a hit. See, if I show somebody who doesn't play video games, most games, it's completely incoherent to them. What are all those numbers? What are all those bars and gauges and icons? What's going on? Are you that guy? What's the floating gun in the middle of the screen? But Shadow of the Colossus is such a wonderfully simple premise, presented in such a cinematic way, that you can explain it in a sentence to anyone, and it's so easy to follow. Cinematic games have been all the rage over the past decade, but a lot of these walking simulators miss the point. They think cinematic means watch cutscenes for hours and take control away from the player. If you ask me, that's not what cinematic means at all. Shadow of the Colossus is a cinematic experience, even though there's barely any cutscenes. Normal gameplay quite often resembles a cutscene, a cinematic experience where your eyes are drawn to nothing but wonder and the Colossus, and maybe Aggro, the horse. Of course, there are icons and bars that appear on screen at time, but even then they are minimalistic, and there might well be an option to turn them off. I've not actually checked. This remaster also comes with a camera or photo mode, if you're a fan of that, meaning you can stop the game at any time, move the camera around and take a picture, apply filters and film grain and, all that sort of stuff. There's also filters that you can use to adjust the appearance of the game overall. The footage in this video is using the Vivid filter on a low intensity. On the flip side, this dedication to the feeling and experience of the game can be turned against it. Video game logic quite often eschews realism for convenience, shall we say. For example, turning circles. If you stand up and walk around in a circle, you're going to have a turning circle, whereas in many video games you are able to pivot on the spot in a very unrealistic manner. Your character is moving, but they're not going anywhere because they're just sort of spinning. It's unrealistic, but it makes the game feel more responsive. When you dodge roll in an action game, there's not too much sense of momentum behind it, because realistically, if you throw yourself at the ground and roll, it's going to take you a lot longer than it does in most games, where it's like, what, half a second, if that? Things like that. Shadow of the Colossus has an impactful and thoughtful system of movement. There is a turning circle. When you do a dodge roll, Wander stumbles and takes a while to get back to, his gate. And this can be turned against the game's favour very easily if you do something the game isn't intending for you to do, like trying to climb things you're not supposed to. The camera often has a mind of its own, sweeping this way or that to give you a beautiful shot of nearby visitors, and most of the time it's great. It looks amazing, but sometimes it will completely freak out and get stuck behind an object, and these objects don't turn invisible as they do in many games. These aren't problems, but they are things to be aware of. If you're like me, and one of your first instincts in a game is to try and climb the walls, well, I tried that in Shadow of the Colossus, and I fell through the world within 2 minutes of starting the game. It happens. I'm thankful the game isn't heavily scripted, because whenever I play heavily scripted games like Uncharted or whatever, I break them immediately, because I never do what the game wants me to do, and everything ends up looking completely stupid. There's a video of Uncharted on my channel, go watch that and you'll see what I mean. I make games look stupid when I don't mean to, I'm just trying to explore. As for more specific issues with this remake, I have noticed that Wander's face is weirdly blank and emotionless. His character model just seems plasticky and soulless. His face, that is, it just looks odd. Maybe that is intentional, I don't know. See, Wander is a human that gradually discards his humanity in the single-minded pursuit of his goal, but with comparing to the original, which has a more stylized human appearance, I think I prefer the original. He seems to emote more when he's, running, fighting, and in general. The pursuit of realism is not always the way to go, if you ask me. Games don't need to be realistic to be good. Humans don't need to look realistic. What's important is that they convey emotions and things that we can empathize with. They don't have to look realistic, they just have to act realistic. Does that make sense? Take Overwatch, for example. I'm not like a huge fan of Overwatch, but the characters in Overwatch, they don't look realistic, do they? They look like they're Pixar characters, but they emote in realistic ways. That is what I think is important. It's a small complaint at any rate. The environments and bosses look amazing. Sometimes I found myself thinking, how is this running at 60 frames per second? It just goes to show, if game developers try, they can make 60 frames per second look amazing. Why don't more of them? And I'm looking at you, Bungie, with Destiny 2. But the human models in Shadow of the Colossus, they don't look bad, they just seemed out of place to me. Apart from Mono, I think is her name, the girl. For some reason her model looked a lot better than the others. Something about her just seemed more stylized and less realistic, but I don't know. The game's soundtrack, I believe, is unchanged since the original, but I'm not sure because I don't really have anything to compare with. But how about replayability? The game is fairly short, maybe 5 or 6 hours. It took quite a bit longer for me than I imagine most people might because I meander a lot. But once you've beaten it, you can do hard mode and time attack to unlock extra items. There's a new game plus as well, and I think all your sort of, not your progress, but your health and stamina progress will carry over so you can continue working on that. There isn't a huge reason to explore the world other than for the sake of it, however. It's a fairly big world, so you could spend a lot of time exploring it. It's just, well, why would you? I did, because I like exploring. The game has no fast travel system, although it does let you unlock shrines here and there that allow you to respawn at them if you die. I don't know, I kind of feel like I wish there was fast travel to the shrines. I get that it would kind of take away some of the gameplay, but when I'm just exploring the world, I wish I could just hop from one side to the other with fast travel. Not necessarily when I'm going for a boss, just when, you know, just when I'm exploring, it would be nice. But I understand why there is no fast travel system, because it would not really fit. There are lizards to catch and fruit to eat that are hidden throughout the world. These will increase your health and stamina, which is what carries over into New Game Plus. But those also increase when you defeat a boss. Like, you defeat a boss, you get more health and stamina, meaning it's a more worthy pursuit of your time to just keep doing the bosses over and over to get more health and stamina that way as you get more. But, well. And speaking of which, you can, after you've defeated a boss, you can go back and sort of pray at their body to fight them again in sort of a flashback thing. It works, it's fine. The remake also adds 79 small glittering objects for your collection, with a new reward unique to this remake, which is, I mean, I guess it's a nice reward if you're interested in that. It's nothing huge though. When I first started playing, I enjoyed exploring the world, but as time went on, that sense of discovery was lessened somewhat when I realised that only one boss will spawn in the world at a time, and in order. You go to the first boss, beat it, and then the second boss spawns, and so on. So eventually, I found myself travelling back to places that I had already visited when exploring the world and realising, oh, this is where the boss is going to be. Something about that was a little disappointing to me, because when I was exploring, I came across all these mysterious structures, and I was like, wow, what is this? Like, what could be the story behind this? And then later on, I go, oh, okay, it's just a boss arena. It still made me interested in the story behind each area, but when they're all just boss arenas for the most part, it definitely, I don't know, it took away some of the joy of exploring. But again, that's kind of more of a me issue, because I don't think the game really expects you to go and explore the whole map as soon as you start the game, but instead do it as you follow the path to each boss. So again, it's not a big problem. That's personally how I tend to play games. If it's an open world game, I will try and explore as much as I can. You know, some open world games, they block areas off, but if they don't, I'll explore everything before I touch the actual story content. And I can understand why they don't have the bosses in the world all at once, for any number of reasons, but part of me wishes you could do the first 15 in any order. I wonder if that's how it is in New Game Plus, maybe? This remake also has a mirror mode, which I've not touched, but I assume it just flips the whole game. Finally, before wrapping up, let's talk briefly about the story. I mean, I've honestly outlined it about as much as I can. Wanda travels to this forbidden land to try and revive Mono, with the help of some mysterious entity known as Dormin, which says she can be revived, but you have to defeat these 16 Colossi which are sealing away Dormin's power. There is plenty to speculate about on the world, locations, Colossi, characters, and so forth. Is it a prequel to Eco? A sequel? Unrelated? How about The Last Guardian? What does the ending mean? There is a lot of good conversation to be had, but the actual story in-game is a very simple one, presented just fine. If you really dig into it, the ending in particular, there are a few little nitpicks one could have. I'm not going to go into them here because it would, be spoilers and stuff, but there are a few small details in the ending that just made me go like, what was the point of this then? I don't know. It's not really worth going into, and again, it doesn't take away from the game. It's just like one of those, why didn't they fly the eagles to Mordor kind of thing. And yes, there is a very good reason why they didn't fly the eagles to Mordor, and I'm sure there's a good reason for this too. But it's one that they don't really ever touch on, and you wouldn't really want them to touch on it either, because it would feel a bit silly if they suddenly gave you all this exposition to explain things. Lord of the Rings didn't really have an excuse though, because those movies are like 3 hours long each. You think they could have had a 30-second scene where someone said, hey, why don't we just fly to Mordor? And then Gandalf slaps them with his staff and says, don't be silly, you dumb hobbit. But in summary, Shadow of the Colossus is a nice, simple game. There is some depth to it, in that you can do kind of advanced tricks with the physics. I personally can't, but that's just me. Is it worth getting the remaster if you have the original, or played the original? That would depend on how much you enjoyed the original. If you liked the original, then I would say definitely pick it up, because you're going to get to experience the game at a higher frame rate, which definitely improves the experience, and you can compare with your initial experience and contrast and compare, see how it holds up, what things have changed, how different it looks in the new style. If you've never played the game like me, I think it's worth picking up. It's a very personal game though, and from all the people I've spoken to over the last decade plus about it, of all the people I've overheard talking about it, Shadow often seemed to be an experience to go through at an important time. Perhaps it was an escape from studying for finals, or some welcome isolation in a chaotic life. Whilst it might not be anything mind-blowing from a game standpoint, the atmosphere and feeling it imparts is top-notch. There is something mystical and magical about it. How that holds up in the remake compared to the original, I'm not sure. I think it might be slightly lessened somewhat, as there is that X factor which could be missing in the remaster, perhaps. The underlying game is fully functional, but what you get out of Shadow of the Colossus, well, that depends on you. I do think it's worth experiencing though, and if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments, and until next time, thank you so much for watching.